Their sons and daughters were killed fighting the Islamic State. Backed by a handful of US and European forces, 11,000 Kurdish men and women gave their lives to destroy the caliphate. Their reward? To be abandoned by their erstwhile American allies and left to the mercy of their enemy, Turkey. Today, American armour was moving away from the border between Rojava, the Kurdish-held part of Syria, and Turkey, just leaving 2 posts, according to the State Department, which contradicted the White House. As Turkey moved hardware towards the border over the weekend, President Trump spoke on the phone to President Erdogan and seemingly gave him carte blanche to cross, saying in a statement that Turkey will now be responsible for all ISIS fighters captured in the area. The Kurds are currently holding tens of thousands of ISIS prisoners, men and women, including British and other European jihadis. The Turks can only take responsibility for them, as Donald Trump wants, by occupying Rojava, where the prisoners are held. Since defeating ISIS, Kurdish forces have controlled part of Syria east of the Euphrates, backed by about 1,000 US troops. In August, a 3-mile buffer zone was agreed along the Turkish border to be jointly patrolled by Turkey and the US. But President Erdogan wants to go 20 miles inside the border and control major Kurdish towns, including Kobane and Kamishli, as well as camps of ISIS prisoners at NE Syria and Al-Roj. Today, President Erdogan was in Serbia. He has recently threatened to invade Rojava to attack the Syrian Kurds. He sees them as terrorists because they're connected to Turkish Kurds fighting for independence from Turkey.
The American delegation has held talks with ours and continues to do so. This will carry on in the same way after last night's call. We have made the decision, and now we may just arrive in the night.
But even President Trump's domestic supporters were shocked at the betrayal of Kurdish allies.
So the Kurds stepped up when nobody else would to fight ISIS. If we abandon them, good luck getting anybody to help America in the future with radical Islam, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS. If you believe that Iran is a threat to the region, they're the biggest winner of this. And you may be tired of fighting radical Islam, but they're not tired of fighting you.
This morning, he sent out a flurry of tweets saying that now Turkey, Europe, Syria, Iran, Iraq, Russia and the Kurds would have to figure out the situation themselves. But then he tweeted, "If Turkey does anything that I, in my great and unmatched wisdom, consider to be off limits, I will totally destroy and obliterate the economy of Turkey. I've done before." 2 weeks ago, the Americans persuaded Kurdish forces to destroy some border defences. "We'll protect you from Turkey," they said. So much for that. But who knows what the US policy is now? Not those who read President Trump's tweets, seemingly not the State Department nor Pentagon. Maybe in his great and unmatched wisdom, not even President Trump himself.
Lindsay Hilson. Well, Bilal Wahab is a Kurdish specialist from the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. He joins us now from Washington, D.C. What do you think the Kurdish forces will do in northern Syria? Will they fight or withdraw and let Turkey take that land?
It's good to be with you, and that was a very funny report, by the way. The Kurds have so far condemned the decision by President Trump and called on the other parts of the U.S. government to fight back and protect the Kurds on one hand, but they also vowed to fight. So the areas that Turkey is eyeing, they are heavily fortified Kurdish positions, and the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, see them as their land and their people, and they have basically pledged that they will fight. Not only fight with the existing soldiers, but also withdraw some of the police force and the security force that is guarding the Al-Hul camp, the ISIS camp of prisoners that your reporter was just referring to come and join the fight at the border, and that might create a vacuum and perhaps an opportunity for some of the ISIS fighters to escape that camp. In fact, that very thing was what al-Baghdadi, the head of ISIS, called for in his last recorded speech.
I'm assuming you meant funny because it was quoting the president. I mean, will the Kurds ever trust America again?
I think the this is not the first time that the question of abandoning the Kurds comes up. This happened last year. Then the administration and the different parts of the U.S. government pushed back against the decision that was made by the president. The Kurds still hope that such a scenario might play out because the details of the withdrawal of U.S. troops involves so many logistical, security, and even civilian, also humanitarian coordination efforts. That is not something that could happen, within hours or days. So on the one hand, they have condemned the speech. On the other, the SDF has called on the different parts of the U.S. government to push back. But of course, the messaging of abandoning the Al-Hul camp in order to join the fight against a possible Turkish incursion is also messaging to the broader international community, but particularly to Washington, that this is not just going to be a fight between the Turkish military and the SDF, but this is going to have wider regional implications. So they have understood this, Washington, and they're also playing the same, using the same language or playing the same game, the same PR game.
It also depends, obviously, to what extent Turkey wants to invade, how much land it wants. Do you think ultimately the Kurds will have to, as they have in other parts of Syria, do a deal with President Assad?
Well, actually, it's not clear how deep Turkey really wants to go because, again, if you just read the tweets by President Trump, that's a huge responsibility that I'm not sure Turkey is willing to shoulder. To be responsible or take responsibility for the Al-Hul camp and to be in charge of ensuring that there is no ISIS resurgence. Perhaps Turkey itself would walk back and say, that's not what we signed up for. Just throwing the responsibility at Turkey and then now involving other partners is not going to be just accepted at face value. So there might be pushback in that front as well.
You've talked about the dangers here of ISIS resurgence and of prisoners escaping. In simple terms, do you think this is going to lead to Islamic State too?
Well, there are the camp itself and whether a vacuum will create an opportunity for some of them to escape, perhaps the more dangerous elements of the camp to escape. But let's also not forget what's happening in Iraq. Last week, the country witnessed mass protests in the cities, in about 9 different cities, resulting in mass injuries, 4,000 people injured, over 100 killed. And that also resulted in the Iraqi government withdrawing some troops into the inner cities to maintain peace. So that in itself, both politically and security-wise, might create a vacuum and therefore an opportunity for an ISIS resurgence not only on the Syrian side, but perhaps on the Iraq side as well. And the deal with the Assad regime, to go back to your earlier question, I don't think the Assad regime is going to come to the defense of the Syrian Kurds. It has no qualms about seeing them weakened and crushed so they can perhaps, if one day, make a deal with the regime. If the Kurds of Syria were to make a deal with the Bashar Assad regime and perhaps with the Russian government as backers or as enforcers of that deal, then the Kurds will be making that kind of deal from a position of weakness rather than a position of strength.